Some restaurants, no matter how fantastic they were simply not intended to last. Here are some of the chain restaurants that closed their doors in America. White Tower. There is a distinction between being similar and outright copying. The unpleasant truth is that White Tower is a rip-off. The Milwaukee restaurant, which launched only a few years after White Castle, bears the same castle-inspired branding and even some of the same name selections. White Castle, however, was also aware of this and took the parallels seriously. In the 1930s, White Castle sued White Tower, forcing the company to alter its brand. Surprisingly, this didn't stop White Tower from succeeding. At its height, the chain had close to 300 sites. Sadly, the chain's conclusion occurred in 2008. Red Barn. Red Barn was one of those franchises that distinguished itself from the competitors due to the restaurant's unmistakable resemblance to Red Barns. The restaurant had a self-serve salad bar and famous hamburgers when it first appeared in the early 1960s. Their huge Barney and Barn Buster mimicked the Big Mac and Whopper respectively, the two most known hamburgers in the nation. At its height, Red Barn had hundreds of outlets across the country and even a handful outside in Australia and Canada. Red Barn, however, was all but abandoned by the end of the 1980s as a result of several ownership changes and adjustments in consumer eating patterns. Red Barn made an effort to refresh its look and remodel its menu, but it was too little, too late. Chi-Chi's. There aren't many people out there who don't like stopping by a decent Mexican restaurant once in a while. After all, one of the most favored types of cookery in America is Mexican cuisine. Therefore, it might have surprised some people when the renowned Mexican restaurant chain Chi-Chi's started to disappear across the country. In the middle of the 1970s, Chi-Chi's made its debut in Minneapolis with the tagline, "The Celebration of Food," and it quickly spread to more than 200 sites throughout the nation. Sadly, a string of poor management choices, fierce rivalry, and a hepatitis A epidemic caused the once thriving Mexican food empire to go extinct. Chi-Chi's was not just a joyful Mexican experience, but also a delicious one, with well-known delicacies like fried ice cream topping the menu. Fortunately, there is still some hope for Chi-Chi lovers. Over in Europe, a few select places are still to be discovered. Howard Johnson's. Although it may be difficult to fathom now, Howard Johnson's formerly ranked among the largest franchises in the nation. When Howard Deering Johnson took over the company after his father died, the future chain, which had been operating as a modest newsstand and soda fountain store in the 1920s, underwent a thorough makeover. With the help of a new ice cream recipe, Johnson rebranded the company, transforming the modest outlet into a massive franchise. As excited customers waited to sample the up to 28 drastically different ice cream flavors and enjoy a casual eating experience, the business immediately took off and quickly expanded across the nation. Unfortunately, the fast food business model's simplification and innovation, led by companies like McDonald's, led to the franchise's demise. As a result, Howard Johnson's lost steam and finally vanished. Steak and ale. A sizable chunk of the population appreciates a good juicy steak, but the typical steakhouse might be a tad on the expensive side. Unfortunately, Norman Brinker, who also developed Chili's and Jack in the Box and other well-known franchises, founded Steak and Ale in the mid-1960s. This steakhouse caliber restaurant offered steaks at a reasonable cost. Steak and Ale also introduced several restaurant innovations, including free refills, dinner specials at lunchtime prices, and an all-you-can-eat salad bar. It's no surprise that Steak and Ale shops started to spring up all throughout America, given the many innovations and affordably priced steak. Sadly, there is a reason why the price of the premium meat steak served at those upscale steakhouses is so high. The low-cost steak business model was completely abandoned by Steak and Ale in the late 2000s as a result of this and the escalating competition. New to this place? We won't disappear then, so click the subscribe button in a split second. Thanks a lot. VIPs. Pulling an all-nighter when traveling may be challenging, especially if you find yourself craving anything more than a fast food burger. VIPs stepped in to save the day at that point. With sites along important interstates, VIPs was one of the earliest chains of 24-hour restaurants in America. Popular truck stop fare was offered by VIPs all over the US Northeast, and it later spread as far west as Nevada and California. Offering free maps and encouraging employees to advise guests on the best areas to visit, the chain was also helpful to travelers on the road. Unfortunately, the business was far too similar to the competing Denny's restaurant chain, and eventually VIPs disappeared across the nation. Ironically, Denny's purchased the majority of the VIP restaurant locations. Beefsteak Charlie's. A unique steak sandwich with a history dating back to the first decade of the 20th century, Beefsteak Charlie's is created by combining these two. There isn't a single person in the world who doesn't find the idea of endless salad, beer, wine and sangria to be quite alluring. This is evidenced by the chain's expansion to encompass more than 60 sites throughout the east coast of the United States. Unfortunately, the company learned the hard way that providing infinite food supplies can be rather expensive. Despite serving clients with an endless supply of food for more than 60 years, Beefsteak Charlie's eventually declared bankruptcy in the late 1980s. In the late 2000s, the final site shut, marking the end of the seemingly unending everything. Lum's. It's a sure guarantee that you're going to generate attention when your restaurant is recognized for dishes like beer-steamed hot dogs, and that's exactly what Lum's was able to achieve. The restaurant chain's original location was in Miami, where it served the aforementioned beer-themed hot dogs as well as other delicious classics like the 32 Spice Mix Ollie Burger and sherry-infused sauerkraut that topped the drunken hot dog from 1956 until 1969. Because of how well Lum's was doing, its founders Clifford and Stuart Pearlman made the decision to spend $60 million to purchase Caesars Palace in Las Vegas before finally selling the business. Sadly, a distinctive and enjoyable menu wasn't enough to preserve the failing brand. We may once more attribute Lum's shifting ownership for the company's eventual bankruptcy filing and subsequent demise. Henry's Hamburgers. Yes, hamburgers are widely available across the nation now, but in the middle of the 1950s there was just a handful of promising newcomers, like Burger King, McDonald's, and Henry's. In fact, Henry's had already been operating for a year when McDonald's first debuted, and it was well on its way to expanding, with 35 stores cropping up in the Chicago region alone. By the 1960s, there were more Henry's restaurants nationwide than there were McDonald's and Burger King. Unfortunately, nothing lasts forever, and in Henry's case, the hamburger chain eventually fell victim to the giant burger chains and started to disappear nationwide by the 1970s. Not all Henry's sites, nevertheless, have perished. Like the dinosaurs, there is still one Henry's around, but you'll need to travel to Michigan to dine there. It serves hamburgers, shakes, and fries. Burger Chef. When it originally opened its doors in the middle of the 1950s, Burger Chef was one of the rapidly expanding burger restaurants. At its height, the business had more than 1,200 locations. The only other franchise with a higher total was McDonald's. Many fast food innovations, such as the Flame Broiler, which allowed the franchise to deliver close to 1,000 burgers per hour, were also the work of Burger Chef. Long before any other chains entered the market, the company was also the first to offer a triple threat meal deal, which included a burger, fries, and beverage. Sounds familiar, Unfortunately, the former Mighty Burger franchise couldn't keep up with the competition, so it was sold to Hardee's at the start of the 1980s for 44 million big ones. Little Tavern. Burgers are pleasurable, reasonably priced, and perhaps even a little bit of fun for the majority of us. When you bite into the slider, a little burger the size of your palm, it becomes even more apparent how accurate this is. Nowadays, there aren't many slider-focused franchises to be found, and the same was true in the past. However, White Castle and Little Tavern were two restaurants that were proudly churning out numerous burgers in the United States. How did Little Tavern work? Little Tavern was in many respects the East Coast's equivalent of White Castle. Both chains supplied sliders of the squared form and had a similar castle-like structure design. Little Tavern, however, was unable to find a sufficient market niche to remain, while White Castle continued to prosper. Little Tavern was forced to close every site in the late 2000s, despite formerly boasting more than 40. Kenny Rogers Roasters. When you hear the name Kenny Rogers, what comes to mind first? The voice? The beard? or traditional country music like The Gambler? It's most likely going to be all of the aforementioned. Well, how about a lovely 9 rotisserie chicken? Probably not. But in the early 1990s, the country singer-songwriter was active in more than simply the music industry. The rotisserie chicken restaurant Kenny Rogers Roasters, which offered golden brown wood-roasted birds, was founded by Rogers and a former KFC CEO. Regrettably, the firm had a temporary setback when Rogers was sued by rival chicken restaurant Cluckers for utilizing the wood-roasting cooking technique. In response, Rogers acquired the bulk of Cluckers. Unfortunately, the poor luck didn't stop there. In the late 1990s, Kenny Rogers Roasters filed for bankruptcy as a result of fierce competition from well-known chicken companies like KFC and Popeyes. The chain was purchased and sold several times before going out of business nationwide. Brown Derby. The Brown Derby was undoubtedly one of the most famous eateries, thanks in large part to its instantly identifiable architectural form. The Brown Derby, which made its Los Angeles debut in 1926, supplied delectable meals to the top Hollywood stars of the early 20th century. The hat-shaped restaurant, which went on to become a landmark in Los Angeles, gave rise to 3 new sites and produced some classic dishes like the Cobb Salad and the Shirley Temple, all the while exhibiting a wide variety of celebrity caricatures on the walls. However, as time went on, the Brown Derby's allure started to lose its appeal, and when paired with rising LA rent and other financial setbacks, the restaurant eventually closed. Fortunately, Disney's Hollywood Studios in Orlando has a Brown Derby memorial for anyone who wants to experience the Brown Derby. Therefore, the Brown Derby spirit endures, all because of the mouse home. Pizza Haven. One of the most popular dishes in America is pizza, and there are a ton of different pizza alternatives available. The contemporary pizza pie is also popular abroad, as several nations have their own national franchises. Pizza Haven, a franchise with operations in Australia and New Zealand, was one of the chains. The early 1980s saw the establishment of the Australian pizza franchise, which prospered for 20 years by supplying hot slices to both hungry Australians and New Zealanders. Unfortunately, the business was eventually acquired by the 2 largest pizza franchises in the world, Pizza Hut in 2008 and Domino's in 2006, with the Australian outlets going to Pizza Hut. The 4 Christo brothers who founded Pizza Haven put a lot of effort into growing their business. Ideally, the 2 biggest pizza companies compensated them handsomely. Wetsons. In the early 1960s, Wetsons made its debut in the burger market with other emerging chains including McDonald's, Burger King, and a few others. Wetsons was able to compete in the crowded fast food burger market at that point by delivering a 15-cent trademark burger dubbed the Big W and 10-cent fries to hungry consumers for 16 years. During those years, the business had a significant expansion with the inauguration of 70 new sites around New York. Wetsons would eventually be eliminated by the other bigger chains, which led to the closure of the eatery in 1975. The corporation did make an effort to merge with Nathan's Foods, but it was insufficient to stop the competitors from gaining the majority of the market. But not all hope is gone. There are still certain places throughout the world that are doing well. Continue watching by clicking to the next video, ring the bell and click the subscribe button to join our notification squad.